friends and fellow progressives. Welcome to Berlin.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being so disciplined and punctual. Welcome to the highlight session of the Progressive Governance Summit 2024. And we are now joined by two very special guests, the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, and Lea Ypi from the London School of Economics. And this session will be chaired by Catherine Weiner, the editor-in-chief of the, I would say, one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent, progressive voices in Europe, The Guardian. And you will be talking about freedom, peace, and progress in Europe. I wish us all an interesting session. I wish you an interesting conversation. Please join me on the stage.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I've been to this summit before. I think it's fantastic, and it's particularly great to be here this year because last year The Guardian launched our new edition in Europe, Guardian Europe, and it is absolutely flying. We've got a huge audience, particularly in Germany, I have to say. And what our readers here tell us is that they knew we did lots of interesting stuff on news and politics and commentary, but they didn't realize there was so much culture and sport, and particularly in the Euros. And so do have a look at our football coverage right up until the inevitable moment when Germany beats England on penalties. I wouldn't make that joke at home.
Or Albania wins everyone.
Or Albania, everyone's favourite underdogs in the tournament. So, yeah. So, Lea, we'd love to. Both of us have read your fantastic memoir, Free, and I just thought it was such a wonderful book. I loved your child's eye take on life in Albania under communism. But then I also loved your take on your teenage years after the Hoxha regime had fallen, and your really surprising, in my view, take on the sort of two systems you witnessed as a child and a young adult.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And it's a pleasure and an honor. And I feel a little bit like wannabe Machiavelli talking to wannabe Lorenzo. So,
I'll take it. So, you said my world. I think this is on the last page of your book. Actually, you said my world is as far from freedom as the one my parents tried to escape, which stopped me in my tracks. Do you really believe that liberal democracy is as far from freedom as under the Hoxha regime?
Yeah, because I think of freedom as an ideal, and I don't think of it I think of it in a very actually German Kantian way, which is that it's not about measuring what was here and what was here, and it's not about something that you can quantify and you can establish relations between units and think of in this very consequentialist way. I think of it as an ideal that was there during communism and that people were very upset for not having, and that was also there as an ideal in the post-communist years during the transition, and that people were and still are upset for not having. And indeed, most of the book is about the difference between freedom as an ideal and freedom as an ideology, as that which is packaged for us as freedom, but where, in fact, it's something much more complicated, and it's a search.
And the search is still ongoing. Capitalism has a lot to answer for, you seem to conclude.
Well, we wouldn't have a progressive summit if we'd been done with the search, so...
So no way. And tell us what you thought of the book, Herr Scholz. What did you make of it?
First, I loved reading it, and I really ask many to read it. So this is something which impressed me quite a lot. And it's also important acting as a politician, going around in Europe, discussing with the now Prime Minister, President of the country, and seeing the development. But I think it is a question about freedom, yes, and so it's very important to understand the development over there. I surely disagree on the question in what stage we are living. I think it is a democratic world we have in Germany and in the European Union, and obviously there are questions for social progress that is needed, that have to be answered, and activities that are necessary. This is why I'm engaged as a progressive, but this is a part of the discussion in our democracy. And yes, it's a capitalist society.
Did it make you think differently about anything, though? I mean, did it make you see the GDR differently, or what's happened to East Germany since?
No.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not East German, so I don't have to defend the East German position. It's okay. I guess I would say that I perhaps have a slightly different take from the Chancellor on the relationship between capitalism and democracy, and indeed how they both connect to freedom. Because I think of freedom as a universal ideal, and indeed as a cosmopolitan ideal that is for the whole world. And in a world that ours that is integrated, globalized, where, as Kant says, if you have injustice in one part of the world, it's perceived in another with equal strength and effect. It seems to me it's very hard to say that we live in free societies when there are huge areas of the world where there is no freedom, because actually when there is no freedom in one part of the world, if you think of it in this integrated way, then it affects us, and there is no freedom in this part of the world either. And it seems to me you have to be very self-centered as a society to think that we have freedom here and all we need to do is wait for it to be realized in other parts of the world, because I think capitalism threatens freedom. It threatens it in Germany, it threatens it in other parts of the world, and what makes it less threatening here are the movements that fight it and the politics that opposes that entire structure. And so to the extent that we have democracy, and to the extent that there are societies where it's more compatible with freedom and where we think we have more freedom, it's because there have been struggles of the past, of the kind that the Chancellor will know very well, from indeed socialists and social democrats, to overcome these forces that limit us. And that's why I think it's not an either or, it's a political process that is open, and it can't be complete until it's complete for everyone.
So it's not about capitalism per se, it's the type of capitalism.
Actually, no, this is where I would push back. I think it is about capitalism per se, and we think that neoliberalism is indeed the worst evil. But actually, capitalism is a very stretched out historical phenomenon, and a structure that, as I say, has pervasive global effects for everyone, and that goes through periods of boom and bust, where when things go well for capital, they go well for democracy, and when they don't go well for capital, they don't go well for democracy either. And we have just normalized this way of thinking, and therefore now think, well, if it's not neoliberalism, then it's capitalism that we like. But I would urge all the progressives here to actually go back to the social democrats of the origins, and their founding father, Edward Bernstein, who was also a Kantian, incidentally, and who wrote this wonderful book called The Presuppositions of Socialism, where the argument is exactly that capitalism and democracy are not compatible.
Are they?
They are. I disagree. But I would like to, if you allow me, I will say some words on this question. First, we have to understand we are living in a world where the whole world is now capitalist. So this is due to all the former socialist countries, communist countries. China is a capitalist country. Russia is. Two different developments after communism, which we see, but it is now capitalism. I think the only country that is not might be North Korea, but we face very different types of capitalist market-driven economy, and so it is not the question if this is the case. The question is whether we are able to develop democracy, which is important for all of us, and it makes a difference if you are living in a society without fear, to say it with a famous philosopher, as a liberal democracy, and or if you are not living in such circumstances. And the second is that I think there are different models of capitalist market economy possible, and one is the social welfare state, which my party is proposing, and especially the former leaders are really supporting in the development of our society. And I'm saying this as one of the representatives of the second oldest party in Europe. The other one are the Tories, if I see it right. And we worked right from the beginning for democracy, for the right to vote, the right to elect members of parliament, the freedom that is necessary for you personally, and we worked for social welfare as part of the modern economy. And I think this is still a task, aside of all the other questions we are facing. But I would go to one aspect which you mentioned, and this is the question of globalization. I would like to say that globalization is a benefit for world development, and that we have to go away from the views we had on this question in the 70s, or were discussed when there was the discussion about the global south, saying that this is a risk for them. But the reality is that billions of people entered middle class all over the world, especially in Asia, but not just there, also in the south of America, also in Africa. And there is a good chance that in the world we will see in the midst of this century, with then 10 billion people, will be a world that possibly has a standard of living that is very similar to the one we had, let's say, 1950. This has many consequences. One is about climate change. We will not be able to have an industrial model that is like 1950 or even like today, with all the fossil resources we are going to use. But it also is a question which is important for us in Europe and North of America, because we must have an answer to the question why in the most lucky countries of the world we have right populist movements and unrest. And you see it in Finland. From outside of Finland, people ask, do they have problems? You see it in Sweden. From outside Sweden, the people ask, do they have problems? The same with Norway, with Denmark, with the Netherlands, with Germany, with Austria, with Swiss, with the north of Italy, to be precise. So this area of very rich countries that made it that there is a high employment rate, that people have a chance for a better life, but there is the development of a certain welfare state that is existing, where there is access to schools and a chance for a good education, if you are living in a family of poor people. And that is something we have to understand. And I think it has to do with globalization, because as it is not like in the 70s, 60s, where we're just exploiting resources from these countries, but as it is a world where there is industrialization in these places of the world as well, people are not anymore that sure that nothing could happen to them because of the big distance between us and them. So the success of globalization, I think, is one of the aspects of insecurity, and is exploited by the far right, as we see. And so this is what we have to understand. And that's coming back to the original question, means for me that we should not, that we should really estimate democracy and the freedom of speech and a secure life, that we should not discuss whether we are living in a capitalist world or not, that we should discuss about the model that gives security and hope for the future for all people in the world, yes, but also for those in Europe and the North of America.
Can I answer? My initial question was not whether there is capitalism globally. My question was whether there ought to be capitalism globally. And so we can't go from is to an ought. We have to try and think about what might be the reasons for why there should not be capitalism globally. And it seems to me that globalization, yes, has the benefits that you mentioned, and yes, it has been lifting people from poverty, but it was doing so already in the 18th, 19th century when the so-called commercial society began to expand. Indeed, the Communist Manifesto starts with a whole applause and hymn to the bourgeoisie and to the expansion of capital in other parts of the world, and to how it, as Marx says, batters down all the Chinese walls and all the benefits of globalization. The problem is not that it lifts people from poverty. The problem is that in doing so, it creates inequality. And we know that inequality has been rising, and that power differentials between the north and the south of the world put pressure then on countries in the north as well, where again, it's not about developing social welfare states here and then hoping that globalization will trickle down and will produce the same effects elsewhere. It's about understanding that what is done here comes at a cost. And there I would disagree with you with the analysis that says, well, we're not in a model like the one from the 70s because we're not exploiting resources, because in a way you are exploiting resources still. There is, for example, brain drain from other parts of the world. There is migrants, there is human labor that does move from the south to the north of the world and does get exploited because it's disenfranchised and doesn't have adequate political representation. And it seems to me that one of the reasons for why it doesn't have that adequate political representation is that social democratic parties in Europe and the world have exactly gone back to this, away from this original project of trying to, through democracy, which is a process, it's not complete anywhere in the world, push back and contain and eventually overcome capitalism, because again, that's not either or, it's a process, to the idea that all we need to do is tame it, but we have to accept that it's there and that it's easier, as someone said, to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. So for me, as I say, the question is not, I mean, all of these things can be true at once, but it does matter what narrative the left has. And it's very, again, as I see it, quite concerning that even left-wing parties with a history like the Social Democratic Party of Germany are unwilling to go back to those origins, that to rethink this big picture of how we reimagine capitalism and how we reimagine the relationship of democratic forces to it.
So we are still working for a better society, to make it clear, and this is also part of our party program, but to be very clear, we should understand where we are living. And I have two disagreements. The first is about, is there no change in the way of globalization we have? I think there is. And I will explain it with an example. So when capitalism, modern industrial capitalism, this one, started in England, one of the first activities was destroying the textile industry in India. Now textile industry is in India and in Bangladesh and some other places. So, and that's a difference which should not be underestimated. It's completely different to what we saw before, because today there is industry going to these countries. We are facing the question of cheap labor for the world market, and this is a question also for the United States and the politics in the United States for Europe, and the question whether we have a chance for having enough jobs in this development society and the economy to come, which I think worked so far well for especially my country and some others, but it's not naturally so. So this is something we have to work for. But the difference between the time before the 70s, I would say, is that this is happening, and this is the rise of Asia, the rise of China, for instance, that a lot of production came there, which is traditionally industrial production, and which has not happened before. So that's a difference, my view. And the second is, we have yet not a better model for economic dynamism and dynamics as the system we have today. And when I was in my youth organization, the Young Socialists, we made decisions on companies that should go under public control. Lists. When you look them today, you have 2 days for laughing, because you won't find a single one, or nearly no single one of those today in the economy. So there are a lot of new companies that came up through the dynamics of the market economy. And I just to name the most famous, like Google or Tesla, or what happened in the last decades. And so I would say it is a mistake to work on the wrong question. And the right question from my perspective is developing a secure perspective for people in a world that is changing, giving them hope that they are themselves, people that are similar as they are, will have a good future, and that they don't have to be afraid about the world to come. And this has also to do with social cohesion and the social welfare state as an aspect of a society where it's good to live in. And I think it's worth fighting for.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm just making more specific proposal here. I don't think we're disagreeing on the goal, and I think your party is right to have changing the world as a principle. But then I think every party has changing the world as a principle, and then there are differences between parties in the way they see society, in the way they articulate political conflict, in the way they diagnose the conflicts that they're witnessing. And it seems to me that if I go back to the terms that you mentioned, so one is security and the other one is the people, both of these are very vague terms that need to be populated, because both of these terms are being appropriated and indeed used with more or less legitimate reasons by all kinds of political parties. And so if we want to distinguish what this project means for democracy in Germany, in Europe, and in the world, we have to have a more specific diagnosis of the problems of globalization, of the principles that help us overcome these problems, and some kind of insight into what future problems there might be. And my concern is that party democracy right now has become a place where it's about the leader, it's about the policy, it's about visions of the better world in very general terms, but where we actually are not given any specific concrete diagnosis of what goes wrong. And when we want to have those specific diagnoses, it's all turned into either geopolitical conflicts or conflicts between cultures or conflicts between religions. And this all essentializes factors that, although they're important, miss out on a really important part of the socialist tradition, which is, well, there are also distributive conflicts and material conflicts. And on that, I don't think the question of inequality can be tackled from within capitalist principles and from within presuppositions of that kind.
So the battles become about culture wars rather than about inequality and money.
As I said, we need a social market economy and social welfare state. We have to look that everyone has the good chance for a safe development in our life, in his life. And this means that we have to have demands on this question. This was the question of minimum wage, which we raised and was part of our campaign. It was the question of respect that we raised, saying that this is about how we look at the people that are working and how are their perspectives. This is something about the pension scheme and the stability it gives to lives, which is a part of the politics we are developing. This is a question of education, of childcare, of health system. So there are a lot of things that we could do for making life better. And we have to give answers to all these aspects which are now creating insecurity and giving a chance for the far right and populist movements to exploit it for their aims. And it was, just to name it, Corona for a long time, which was a big threat for many people's life. We made it through it, but still there is a lot of questions about this time. There is the war of Russia against Ukraine, which is a big aspect of insecurity because it's very near to us, and it's also a war that is breaking all agreements we had in the past, that there should be no change of border by force. And we have other conflicts which everyone sees at TV, and many people are thinking of how this is developing in the Middle East. The question of all the conflicts we see in Africa, people know about it. And this is creating an atmosphere of insecurity where we have to react to. There is the technological development where people don't know what will be the outcome of all these very massive changes we are facing. artificial intelligence, robotics, the question of quantum computing, the question of analytical biology, which is changing a lot of things and will change our life definitely. And there are more questions to be raised. There is also the question of climate change, which asks us to develop a new industrial model that gives us a chance to create growth and wealth without harming the climate. And all these things are happening at the same time. And so it is very important for us to understand how we can give the people a perspective that this will have a good outcome, to say it like this, because this is the basis that they can hope for something, and that they are not hearing to those who are saying it is the foreigners, it is the people from somewhere else, it is people who are having a different lifestyle, and all these questions which are exploited in times of insecurity. So hope and the chance for having a better world is, I think, the main question for the times to come.
Yeah, can I just one very small thing, because I agree with everything here, but what I'm saying is that we don't have, we meaning the left, we can't have an alternative narrative to the right if we reduce the conflicts to geopolitical conflicts and if we reduce the solutions to policy proposals. We need an alternative that says to the worker in Germany, actually, you can have solidarity with a worker in Albania because you are both implicated by European and global structures where injustices are reproduced that don't overlap with national boundaries. And the problem is that when the Social Democrats turned the project of developing these transnational forces and rethinking democracy beyond the nation state to just the project of consolidating the nation state and the welfare states of each individual country, they have basically given in a really important part of their narrative, which is that democracy, that freedom have to be transnational, that there has to be cross-national solidarity. And when I say we need to return to the critique of capitalism, it's not because I like to talk about Marx and teach Marx and think the word is fancy, because I think that critique gives us an analysis of society as society that is also made up by economic conflicts, which, if they are reduced to conflicts between states, gives a really important part of the game away to the right. And this is where I think the left is falling behind, because the narrative is being driven by the right, and we just don't have a convincing alternative that can speak across boundaries, across nations, and it's a vision for change that can be cross-national in that way.
Is this so?
You think that you disagree?
I doubt.
You're proven wrong.
I doubt. So the European Union is, I think, a project which gives a good chance for every country within this framework to prosper, and also those that will attend there, Albania, for instance. And yes, forming this European Union, forming this common market, giving the chance for free movement of labor has consequences, as it had in the past, even within our countries. But this is something which gives many people a good chance for a better life, and which is also giving many countries the chance for growth and development. Who would have expected just in 1990 that we will have this very good development of economy in the Baltic states, in Poland, in Czechia, in Slovakia, in Hungary, in Romania, as we see it today, and Croatia and Slovenia, for instance, and more countries to come. I think there is a good chance that this will happen to all member states. Yes, there are still differences in the wages, this is true, but I think step by step there is a good chance for something where everyone is profiting. What we need in this case is that we have a political debate in the European Union about questions of social cohesion within the Union, which is a question that is raised by the Social Democrats in the European Union. That is a question where we fight for. And for instance, our Spitzenkandidat, Niklas Schmidt, raised this question very often in his campaign, and it's a topic of a topic that is relevant for what S&D is doing in the European Parliament. So I think it is a question that is raised, and we have policies, and we are following to improve the situation for everyone in Europe. This is the same if we look at economic cooperation with Asia, with Africa, and the South of America, and giving a good chance for development. Germany is investing a lot for making this happen. But also we are looking for chances for a better development in these countries, which have to do with democracy, which is a basis for these countries for a good development. Rule of law is essential also for the growth of economy. We should not underestimate this aspect. And it's also something where we are very much trying to give good chances for these countries. And if you go around to, for instance, I was in Ghana and Nigeria and discussed with the young people over there, they have an African perspective, many of the young people there. It is not the case that everyone is thinking of going to Europe or to Germany. When the journalist joining me in this visit asked me, but not everyone wants to go to Germany. I said, where is the problem? There will be some, and this is good for them and for us, for the labor market, but this is not the real problem of brain drain as I see it. It is a question of exchange in the world, which is good for everyone in the end.
Yeah, it's good if it's symmetrical, and if the powers balance is such that you can have exchange that is not from one side to the other only, where you have circulation. So then in that case it is good. But it's only symmetrical if there is a project for power inequality and for overcoming power inequality. And it seems to me that the European Union is a vehicle to that, and is really important and needs to be preserved and defended on that front. But it seems to me that the European Union by itself doesn't answer the question. It doesn't, because the European Union can be pulled in many different directions politically. And so even when it comes to the European Union, there needs to be a project that is specifically of the left, which actually addresses the conflicts of the European Union and speaks to this question of social justice in the European Union. I was joking earlier that there's Machiavelli, we want to be Machiavelli speaking to want to be Lorenzo, but there is this wonderful opening in The Prince where Machiavelli writes to Lorenzo and says, look, I'm writing to you this treatise that I'm given, and that's because the princes, the politicians, they see from the hills to the plains, but sometimes they need to also see from the common people, from the plain to the hills. And it seems to me that that's exactly what's actually lacking in the European Union, that there is no insight into the plains. It's all about the hills, and it's all about protecting certain ways in which the European Union has been proceeding, which have been very effective on some levels, but not necessarily on the level of delivering social justice. And it seems to me that the European Union is a political project exactly in that way as well. So just like we fight for social democracy in Germany, we need to have a project for social democracy, I'd say socialism in Europe. And that would mean also a plan on how to promote further integration, how to connect that with enlargement. And the plan can't be one that is just responding to the crises as they emerge. It needs to be a comprehensive one that has a vision for what does, my favorite one, federal socialist Europe look like. But yeah.
A federal socialist Europe, Chancellor.
Heidelberg, we have made a decision in this 1925. My idea is that you have a point discussing democracy in Europe, because we see that there is not a European debate, and this is a risk for any politician that is acting in Europe. There are powerful players, the European Parliament. But it is very difficult for people to follow who is member of the European Parliament and what they are doing there. You know some, if you are very interested in politics, you find it and see it, and you know some of them, I do. But this is not really something which is happening to everyone in the European Union. And then you have this Commission and all these strong, influential bureaucrats over there. And the only one that people could discuss with about the politics that are happening are their national leaders. So they go to Brussels and come back and explain them, I made a good deal because I made it that it was not the wrong decision, just half wrong or half good or whatever. And that's a problem, because if democracy works, it needs a public debate that is following the decision. So we need something of a European debate about European politics. And even in the campaigns, it's a big question. How to make it happen that a question that you as a voter could influence when voting, that the parliament and the politics in Europe will then have going into this direction. We have questions that are relevant for national campaigns. For instance, the minimum wage was on my campaign and the people got it afterwards. They elected me and they got what they elected. But this is very difficult in Europe.
I mean, that was one of the reasons given for the vote for Brexit, the distance of Europe from day-to-day life. I mean,
yeah, but the problem is more the missing political debate. So we are not looking in the newspapers and following a European debate on politics that is not just the leaders are meeting in the European Council or who will be the next Commission president and some other very important decisions we take there, but a debate on questions which are as relevant as the one we are discussing on the national level. And so I think this is what we have to achieve, a European debate on politics with different positions so that people can follow it.
But I think we don't have a European debate on politics because we actually don't have politics. We only have policies. We've lost the politics. And this is the problem. This is also why in Albania, if you ask
for politicians, it's something quite difficult to accept. But it's a good sentence.
Well, I mean, because
although we sometimes have too much.
Okay, let me say what I mean, and let me be even more specific. Party politics. That is to say, principled projects for how society should change in the light of the crisis that we face. I don't really see any exchange between principled projects between the European parties. I mean, I see that there is a kind of project that no one likes, which is the far-right one. And I see that it has some kind of narrative about conflict, about culture, about civilizations. And I also see that the progressives just chase that narrative rather than creating their own one. So I don't really see how you can actually change the European debate if you actually don't have a kind of politics that can support Europe as a whole with a vision for Europe that is a principled social democratic vision. So, and if you go, and this, I say this with all concern, because I'm from Albania, and as you know, in Albania we have all these discussions about European enlargement. If you stop any person on the street and you ask, when is the next accession negotiation meeting, they will tell you exactly when the meeting is. If you ask them what is the meeting about, they won't know. And this might happen not just at the levels of asking people on the street, but also at very high levels, unfortunately. So this, and that's because actually no one's really understood what is Europe for? What are we doing here? Why are we here? What is the project? And that, again, is an implication of the loss of politics, which I trace back to the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War and all the patterns that set in motion, and the way in which the, if you want to call it neoliberalism, I call it capitalism in the neoliberal phase, has drained politics out of societies because it's replaced them with parties that have turned into technocratic managerial entities, into leaders that are just driven by questions of charisma and, you know, these sort of completely shallow, unprincipled discussions about what a leader should be and what a party should be. And so, and the whole debate is about nothing. There's no substance to these debates.
Where's the substance?
Let me answer as a technocratic manager. The question is, what do we understand as politics? Is there politics that are going to questions that are more near to what we can reach, or is it only starting when it's far away? So my view is that there is a lot of politics that will change people's life we could discuss about, and which are different between the parties on the national level as also on the European level. And we have to develop these questions and discuss them, and they will be part of our activities. And going on the national level, fighting for a secure pension scheme is not losing politics. It is important. And it's important enough. It's a great question. And if we disagree on the topic whether this is a great question or not, and we disagree, really, because that's a question which is about how the development of life is going for the people. And the same is when we discuss about education, about access to universities. For instance, it is a difference. If you grew up in the United Kingdom, where you have to pay that many fees for attending university, or if you have the chance to grow up in Germany and some other countries where you pay nearly no fees, and where there is also a scheme for supporting your life during studies. And so it is worthwhile fighting for this. And it's a difference whether things are arranged in the one or in the other way. And that's the same when we discussed questions of technological advantages and how we make it happen that they are also successful for our societies. And so, yes, I think there is a lot of politics. They are different between the right and the left, and not the far right and the far left, but the right and left in our societies. And we have to discuss these topics, and we have to fight for enough support for what we propose. But it is not a small question.
No, absolutely not. But what policies are shaped by principles? And so we fight for national pension scheme because there is an alternative project of society that says actually privatization, investments, pensions invested on the financial markets are also another way of thinking about pensions. And there is a principle there of solidarity, of our future society, that does the work that then justifies the policy on the ground. So I'm not saying the policy is not important. I'm saying that you can't take for granted that people understand when you suggest a policy also what the principle is behind it. Whereas what the right is doing right now is exactly to articulate a policy and to also articulate a principle.
So it's the messaging, it's just messaging.
Well, I don't know about messaging, so I'm a political theorist who don't work with messages.
But what you're saying is that they're not explaining the why.
Yeah, I mean, messaging sounds a bit marketing, like, you know, how do you market it? What is the message? I'm sort of a bit concerned because I think that's also a way of speaking about politics that in itself reveals an interesting phenomenon about the way we actually discuss these questions in contemporary debate, where, you know, we talk about party leaders as company managers, and we talk about party programs as signaling and party platforms. And so all the substance, and that's what goes back to what I was saying earlier, what has capitalism in this stage done to politics and to party democracy. But what I was saying is not, well, you have to have some kind of starry-eyed principle there that you want to realize and then forget about the policy. What I'm saying is that the policy is grounded in a principle, and the principle and the distinction between this principle and that principle needs to be made clear so that people know what they are engaging, who is supporting them, for what reasons. And that's exactly what we're missing, I think, in these debates.
I mean, there's something pulling all this together when you talked about all of these things that are affecting this age of uncertainty with Ukraine and Gaza and the cost of living and climate crisis. And there's a particular issue, isn't there, with young people feeling alienated from mainstream politics and particularly voting for the far right. And I wonder if there's anything in what Lea says that you think could be relevant there.
First, it was wrong to think that if you have, if young people vote and we open it up for people from the age of 16, that they are completely different to their parents and grandparents. So you will have every political...
They can probably take them longer to afford somewhere to live than their grandparents. I mean, they're poorer than their grandparents, aren't they?
No, I think that it is not surprising that we will find every political position between young people you find between older people. So that's what I think is not a difference. We have to work we have to work very hard to give security to people about their future, and we have to tackle all the relevant questions that are important for them. And this is, on the one hand, I'd say, labor rights, it's a social welfare state. I will not come back to it because I mentioned it often enough in our debate. But it's also about security. is there an international order we work for, which is something you can rely on? I think, for instance, it would be very useful if we could establish again something like North-South policy, which was established by Willy Brandt, which was really a big success, and we have to come back to it. We have to develop a policy that is equal-footed with the rising countries of the global South, which have the best rights to be influential in the future. And we have to find a way to explain our people that in the world of 10 billion, the European Union, with its then 400 to 500 million inhabitants, will be relevant. We will have a chance to defend what's important for us: democracy, rule of law, social market economy, just to name them, in this world. But it is not a threat for us that there is an economically and politically successful 400 million nation of Indonesians, or of Indians, or of people from Thailand or the Philippines or from Vietnam or from South Africa or the Nigeria with then 500 million people. To develop a scenario for the future where we can live together in a good way is something which is, I think, progressive policy. We are following it. We have to react to all these strongmen and dictators coming up, and we have to organize security on both fields in developing international and a national order, supporting it, which is relying on the idea of peace, but also making clear that we are strong enough that no one can conquer our territories. This is important for many countries, not just looking to the Baltics, but I named them. They have to get some security from us that we will not let them alone. This is the question of security in our countries. So it is never not a left question to guarantee that you can go on every street without having fears. And it's the same when we discuss the question of economic development. And this must be a question of us, which is not an unimportant aspect of the future life. People have fears if in a world with, I named them, artificial intelligence, for instance.
And do you think these are greater fears for the young? Do you think that's why they've turned to the far right?
I think this is, the young are not supporting the far right. Some of them did when they vote, as the elder did as well. This is my view on this question. So I would say we have to discuss these topics and develop a perspective where things are running into the right direction. So my answer to everyone should be, and I'm working for it, yes, we will have artificial intelligence, it will change our economies, we will have a different way of wealth, we will be able to control it, that we are not ruled by these systems, but in the end, it is creating progress, a better life, and we work for this, and you will have a job.
It's just
the same is with all the other
though,
questions.
Isn't it? It's scary times. We don't know how any of these things are going to work out. It does feel like an extremely scary moment.
Yeah, this is the case. We have some chances in Germany that are different to other countries, and I think this is still something we can work with. That's that it worked well in the past. So also in Germany, textile industry mostly moved to cheap labor countries. But the machines were built in Germany. So this economic model worked. And we have now a situation where nearly everyone is employed. And this is a very special moment, which is good for the things to do. For the next 10, 20, 30 years, we will not have unemployment as a big problem. We will have lack of labor as a problem. And this could be the basis for also progressive politics to work with this.
Higher wages, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's more in the direction of where I was trying to go, but that's because it makes the word people more specific by talking, for example, about working people. And so, when we speak generally about we need to give people security, for example, we have to ask, well, who are these people? Because if you are the son of Elon Musk, you're not as concerned by security as if you are someone who is vulnerable in a precarious job challenged by technological development. And that's where I think
But we could tell the son of Elon Musk that he could have a better life in Germany as where he lives, because has not the need to live in a gated community.
Maybe in a Germany that is run by the SPD rather than the AfD. But
sure, but
I've just got a news line.
I've just got a news line
here. So Elon Musk's son is invited.
I also wanted to say something. Well, first about the far right. Because yesterday I was reading this really wonderful sentence by Voltaire about politics, where he says politics is where people without morals rule over people without memory. And actually, that's a better capturing, because I don't agree with that view about politics in general. I believe in principled politics, and I don't think it's too cynical for me. But I think it says something about the politics of the far right, that it is, or of the right of that kind, the kind of resurgence, that it is really the politics of people with no morals that rule over the people with no memory, because a number of these far right resurgence phenomena we have experienced historically, and these parties hark back to those histories. But we also know that the reasons that these far-right parties surge have to do with economic systems, with collapses in markets, that they, for example, in Europe became particularly prominent with an anti-foreigners discourse in the aftermath of the 1929 crisis. And I don't think it's a coincidence that in contemporary Europe, they became particularly prominent after the 2008 financial crisis and the Euro crisis, for which the parties of the center-left have a huge responsibility. And because they were the parties that were driving these changes in the 90s, not yourself, but a number of your colleagues.
I'm 66, don't...
a number of people
guilty.
Were in key roles and were really working towards the deregulation of labor markets, the undermining of union rights, and the undermining of welfare states that would have given a cushion to people when a financial crisis like the one that hit Europe exploded. So there was austerity, and then there was the far right. And now we can't say, well, it's just the far right that has come out from who knows where and is appealing with these discussions around foreigners and threats because they're regressive and because they are evil and people believe them for reasons that we don't understand. It seems to me that there is a kind of narrative for which, unless there is a reckoning, also a self-critical reckoning from the parties of the center left of where they went wrong and how they could return to relearn from their mistakes in a way, and therefore also, I think, go forward with a more stronger critique of capitalism. Otherwise, we miss the picture. And I think we come out with a very partial view where, again, we can talk about geopolitical conflicts and the rise of Russia and the authoritarian leaders, but actually Russia's friends are about to come to governments in Europe. So these people will actually be running these societies here. It's not going to be an external threat, it's an internal threat. And unless these things come together in one narrative, it's going to be really hard to just talk about how Europe needs to become stronger and to compare and to stand up to Russia.
My view is that the main question for all of us is hope. If you can hope for a better future, this is essential. And so I won't go back to the 2008-9 and all the things that happened earlier, because I think it is not the real reason why in so many different countries we have the same situation. And something we should understand discussing here where we do it is that we have an increase of far-right and right populist parties and movements, though the politics were different in every country, more or less, but the situation is always the same. And my view is that this has to do with this uncertainty about the future, which has many reasons. I explained them here in the debate, I will not recall them, but we have to give a vision that works for the people and for everyone, so that it is a vision which is successful even for an unskilled worker working in an Amazon site, that the world is a good place for him. And this is also an aspect which is important for the left, the progressives, that due to though we had a great success in the development of skills and education for many, it is still something where we have to be responsible for, thinking of us as a group, that we do politics for the unskilled worker, the women working in the shop, and also for the managers and engineers and the skilled people in some advertising companies in Berlin, that we are developing a world that fits for all of us. And my view is that what we tried in our campaign in 21 should be the main aspect for progressive politics in the future, and should be developed further, the question of respect. It does not, no one wants to get some money for doing nothing. The people want to be respected and have a place in the world, and that's what we have to work for. I think there is a chance, but we have to do it intensely, because we are living in a time where there are a lot of insecurities and where we see a lot of skepticism about the future. And so reducing uncertainties and developing something you can hope for will be essential for progressive politics.
We do need to wrap up, Chancellor, but since you've brought hope into the room, the word at least, can you, in 2 weeks' time, we think there might be a Labour government in Britain, and I wondered if you had a message or some advice for Keir Starmer.
So I spoke a lot with him. I met him quite often, and I think he's a very good, pragmatic, social democratic politician. And he
almost a technocratic. What was your phrase?
Technocratic manager.
Technocratic manager.
No. And it looks really good for the elections there. And after that long time, it's something as a social democrat I look for.
No advice?
No advice. And if I would give him an advice, I wouldn't do it in this room.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thanks.